So great, good morning, everybody. We hope you're having a good day despite the chilly weather, but would request that you keep warm and have coffee with you or tea nearby just to keep warm. So my name is Martha Cheruto. I will be your moderator today as we discuss how to be the champions on anti-corruption. We are doing this in partnership with the Blue Company, and what we're saying that as the private sector, we want to lead the discussions on how to fight corruption. We are all aware that corruption disrupts the business environment. It does slow down sustainable development, and at the same time, also makes the country unattractive to investors to come in. Everyone has a role to play on anti-corruption. We have the government, we have the civil society, we have the private sector, and we have ourselves as individuals to fight corruption. So in this mix, we have speakers from different places, and you know them. I will be introducing each of them later as they'll be coming in to talk to us. But as we start, I'd just like to hear input from everyone. We know yesterday was the Africa Anti-Corruption Day to set up the African Union, and all countries in Africa expected to actually just take that discussion forward, and Kenya is one of them. So we are happy to be leading this discussion today and see what we all need to do. So I wish to call upon, at least I'll start with Engineer Patrick to just say something as we start the discussions, and then we'll proceed. Engineer Patrick, you're welcome in remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Martha, and all the attendees who are here today, and all the panelists. Yeah, it's not a great morning. I mean, it's a very damp morning. And I wanted it to be a much brighter morning to discuss matters of anti-corruption, because those things actually warm up my heart. But it's important, I think, that we're discussing this today, because of the Africa Anti-Corruption Day, which was marked yesterday. The instruments that were created to highlight this issue were done, I think, in the early 2000s, quite early 2000s. And in fact, all countries very quickly signed them. But the actual implementation has been something that has really not proceeded as fast as the signing of the paper. And I think for today, for me, the key thing is if we can get some takeaways that can show how we can accelerate that implementation, and get our states to also do the same, that would be a winner. And that for me is really what I'm expecting to see today, and it's what I will be contributing to as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Patrick Obath is the chairman of the KEPSA Foundation, and he leads the discussion on anti-corruption from the private sector. So thank you, and it's great to have you here. I'll call upon Ms. Masinde to also say something as we start. Over to you, Sheila, please.
Thank you very much, Martha, and good morning to everyone who has spared that time on a very cold Monday morning. And I know last night, a lot of people were up waiting for the cup to go home. Well, it didn't go home to England. So I know the sacrifices people are making to try and keep their eyes open this morning and to have this conversation. And for me, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak. Just a day after we marked the 5th Africa Anti-Corruption Day, and particularly looking at the commitments we have made as a country. When you look at the African Union Convention on the Preventing and Combating Corruption document, and look at Article 11, which just talks about the commitments we have made in regard to the private sector, adopting legislative and other measures to be able to combat acts of corruption and related offenses, and also establishing mechanisms to encourage participation by the private sector in the fight against unfair competition, respect for tender procedures, speaking to public procurement, and also in regard to bribery. I think it's a critical conversation, so we can also be able to track how far we have come working together as the public sector, the non-state actors, including the private sector, in regard to implementing the AUC PCC, because as we know, and as Engineer Obath has rightfully said, 18 years on since that convention came into place, and since Kenya signed, is it 2004 or 5? We're still lagging behind in terms of being able to achieve all those commitments and undertakings we have made in the AUC-PCC. So I hope that this conversation today will help us, find a way forward in terms of how we can accelerate achievement of some of those commitments that we made several years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila. I would bring in Dr. Kipngetich. You're starting to just share with us as we start the meeting. Karibu.
Thank you very much. I think this Africa Anti-Corruption Day is important for all of us, because if you look at the potential of Africa compared to what we are doing, the single largest factor has been governance. Corruption is part of that governance agenda. And if we can strengthen governance through the KEPSA platform, and also TI and all other bodies, even including ESCC, if all of us can work together, Kenya can provide the leadership required in Africa to strengthen good governance, because this is what prevents many other things from happening. It distorts policy, it prevents investors from coming, so we can deal with all the unemployment challenges. So it is important for us as a country to do the right thing. And if we can emphasize it at every available forum, including this one, I believe that Africa will be going places. It's a journey, it's very difficult. It is something which is rooted in our society, and to uproot it is not as easy as people think. But if we talk about it, if we commit ourselves to the anti-corruption agenda and consistently do it over time, we can make a dent, and that dent will have significant advantage to our economies. Our economies will begin to grow faster, and generally, we begin to reward also people who work hard, people who do the right thing, because it is the correct thing to do. So I will emphasize this a lot when my time to speak comes, Martha. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kipngetich. Now we bring in Mr. Philip. Please share with us as we begin this discussion, what would you like and what would you expect of all of us? Thank you.
Good morning, all. Thank you for having me. I'm here on behalf of VACC. I'm one of those who was up late last night following the football. So I agree with Sheila, there's a lot of sacrifices being made to stay awake this morning. This is a very interesting discussion because it's coming in the wake of the 5th commemoration of the African Anti-Corruption Day, under the auspices of the AU Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. And what is interesting is that for the most part, people think that corruption is a responsibility of public sector, that is a government. And what I have been trying to tell people, especially those who have registered for this webinar, is that this corruption affects all of us, as already some of the panelists have mentioned. It distorts the economy. It promotes inequality, discourages investment. So it can't be that the public sector, especially the law enforcement agencies like ESCC, are the ones left with the responsibility to deal with corruption. And what I'm looking forward to at the end of this discussion is to engage private sector. I'm seeing ably represented by Patrick, engage a civil society where Sheila comes from, and see whether we can chart the path forward in fighting corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Indeed, he is from ESCC. He's also an assistant director and also head of communications, and he is an advocate. We're also privileged to have Sheila Masinde, who's the executive director from Transparency International. We have Dr. Julius Kipngetich, he's the advisory member of the Blue Company Project. We have Mr. Patrick Obath, who is the chairman of the KEPSA Foundation. And we're truly happy to have all of you with us today. And we'd request you that please take advantage and use the chat box, and we also have the question and answer. Let's make it as interactive as possible. And let's discuss this and all come up with an action plan from this meeting today. And to start us off today is that we'll have a discussion from Sheila Masinde. And maybe as I'll be bringing Sheila on board, is just to recognize the presence of all the leadership from government, from private sector, from civil society that are with us today, and to say thank you for creating your time and joining us and having this discussion with us. So I'll bring in Sheila Masinde, and just to share who Sheila is that Sheila has over 10 years work experience in the media, in media outreach. She also has governance. We also know that she is very experienced in program management. She has worked with TI, and at the same token, she's also worked with the BBC Media Action. She has been an advocacy communications program officer before. She has been a radio news presenter. She has worked with I Choose Life as a program trainer, and even served in terms of resource mobilization. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Kenyatta University, as well as a Master of Arts from the University of Nairobi. And she has served as also in the terms of Board of Directors since January 2020. There is a lot of information about Sheila, but today, what we'd wish Sheila to share with us, because Transparency International has been on the forefront on asking everybody to take responsibility and become anti-corrupt. So Sheila, what we'd request from you today is, what does TI do in regard to anti-corruption? We'd also wish you to tell us how TI is working with the public and the private sector in terms of matters going and actualizing the convention that you've just spoken about, as well as telling us about the tools that are available. And as you do this, please also let us know the current situation from corruption, because you have studies, you've done studies before, and you can give us some background along the studies and what corruption is doing to the country. So Sheila, this is your space. Just let us know from the perspective of Transparency International what is happening. Sheila, over to you if you can hear us. I see your hand up. I hope I've not lost you.
No, I'm here. Sorry if I put my hand up, probably trying to find the mute button. Always seems to move around. Thank you very much, Martha, again, for the opportunity to come back and talk about the subject at hand today. As you have rightly said, yes, I work for Transparency International Kenya. And for us, maybe for people who are not familiar with our work, we are part of the global movement, which is involved in the fight against corruption. And TI Kenya is among about 120 other national chapters, and which are fighting corruption across the world. We have a common vision of a corruption-free society. And in Kenya, what I also want to say that we are all autonomous, but we are reconnected as a movement because of that shared vision and some of the principles that we share in regard to the fight against corruption. In Kenya, we have been in existence since 1999, and currently our work straddles various sectors. I think our main sectors of concern currently, although where corruption happens, of course, we seek to address, but in terms of programmatically, we are particularly focusing on the health sector, the education sector, security, particularly working with the police. And we're happy that we've been able to forge a strong partnership with the police over the years, particularly in regard to supporting institutional strengthening of that critical institution. We've also been working on issues around humanitarian aid and also natural resource governance, here particularly focusing on the extractives, climate governance, as well as land and corruption. In terms of how we work, our approach is basically advocacy, but before we advocate for anything, of course, we have to get evidence. And so we like to say that we describe ourselves as evidence-based because our advocacy is based on evidence. So that means that we conduct a lot of research. Our other approach is institutional strengthening, capacity strengthening, building partnerships, and that is why I'm happy to be here with people and with institutions that we regard as strong partners in the fight against corruption. And also another strong approach is civic engagement, because we work with citizens. We try to engage them in the fight against corruption, to inform them, empower them, and give them tools to be able to perform civilian oversight. I think that's what I can say about TI in short. In terms of the discussion today and how we have worked with the public and private sector in actualizing particularly the AUCPCC. And how this has helped in building a strong anti-corruption network, because that was one of the questions I was asked to address. One is that Kenya is a member of the Kenya Leadership Integrity Forum, which brings together all arms of government, including the ministries, various ministries, the independent commissions, and of course EACC is a secretariat of CLIF, and other non-state actors, including the private and religious sector. And we come together to identify and implement various anti-corruption strategies that speak to the implementation of the convention. We are also a member of the UN Global Compact, of course, whose key focus is, and our key focus there is really to enhance Principle 10 of the UN Global Compact, a principle on anti-corruption and businesses working together against all forms of corruption, including extortion and bribery. We are also, of course, just recently became a member of the Blue Company, and happy to see Dr. Ngetich here. And we hope that we can continue to partner in regard to promoting anti-corruption efforts in the private sector. And for us, I would say in regard to the AUCPC, one of the things that we have been concerned about, as I mentioned earlier, is that when you look at that document, there are a lot of commitments which we were supposed to be able to achieve through the setting up of an establishment and passing development of various policies and enactment of legislations. But this is yet to happen. And so for us, we have been quite committed in terms of trying to push for certain legislations that will enable us to be able to achieve the commitments that we have made within the AUCPCC. Maybe one of them I would like to highlight, and which we have also tried to engage the private sector on, is the enactment of a whistleblower protection law in Kenya, to enhance reporting of corruption and protection of whistleblowers. In fact, even in most of our engagements with the private sector, we encourage them as well to have whistleblower mechanisms within their own institutions, because we realize the potential of whistleblowing in terms of being able to prevent corruption. And so we'd like to encourage our private sector partners to be able to institute those measures within their companies. For us, other than that, whistleblowing, we've also tried to continue to advocate for the operationalization of access to information, because when you look at the AUCPCC, it's also one of the legislative measures that have been proposed for African countries, because access to information is very relevant in the fight against corruption. Kenyans will not be able to fight corruption where they lack information, because that means that information is coming after the act, and then that reduces us to motivations. But if we have access to information, particularly information on financial expenditures, financial management, then it then becomes very easy for Kenyans to be able to stop corruption and just know when corruption is happening. So I think we one of the things we're trying to really push for is the preventive aspects, prevention of corruption, as much as we're also trying to strengthen and encourage institutions to strengthen enforcement efforts, but we really need to focus on preventive mechanisms. And when you look at the AUCPCC, it really speaks to legislative and other measures that countries need to take to be able to strengthen the prevention of corruption. In regard to, maybe let me just start also shortly in regard to the current environment that we operate in and why it is so important for the private sector to be able to lead the fight against corruption and the promotion of integrity in this country. For me, this discussion is happening at a very critical time as we continue to address the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year was a very difficult year, and this year continues to be a very difficult year, not just for Kenya, but for many other countries. And of course, for those in this conversation, you are aware that there have been really great concerns around the rising levels of public debt, coming from 1.8 trillion in 2013, and now I think we're speaking about 8 trillion or more. And this has, of course, led to high public debt repayments, which are squeezing out other public expenditure priorities. And now we are in a situation where the country is forced to borrow to meet our recurrent needs, with the debt repayments literally outstripping revenue collections, which means that we are functionally broke as a country. And then this leaves many Kenyans socioeconomically vulnerable. And then we really now need to look at the role of the private sector in terms of helping to, seal the corruption loopholes, because we are now looking at the private sector to be able to fill those gaps within our economy, so that Kenyans, as much as we are continuing to address this pandemic, that we can still live, somehow comfortably. It's difficult, but to at least live within, some certain levels of I don't know that to call it comfort, because it's very difficult for everyone. But we do realize that I think it's very important to grow the private sector, sustain our private sector at this point, because the prosperity of the private sector will really translate to better economic development for this country, because currently we are constrained as a country following the pandemic, and we really need to look at the corruption within the private sector, and get more commitments from the private sector to be able to help us address corruption, particularly in line with the commitments that you have made with the AU CPCC. I think the one concern we've had as TI, is that, of course, with reduced opportunities for business as we sit now, because of the pandemic, of course, I know that we've seen a lot of private sector organizations struggling, and of course, because of the reduced opportunities for business and income. And then we know that once this happens, when there's reduced opportunities for business and income, this generally then increases the pressure for institutions to engage in illicit actions to be able to gain financially. And then, of course, it has been argued that corruption facilitates business in certain settings, and these facilitation payments made by companies to, quote, get things done are very harmful, as they are funneled up through the system, and then they help to nurture and sustain corrupt bureaucracies and governments. And irrespective of the degree of coercion involved, the fact remains that bribery and other forms of corruption, foster a culture of impunity and of course, repeat corruption, which then really undermine public institutions and fuels a public perception that government and bureaucracies are up for sale to the highest bidder. And then in the end, corruption really remains detrimental to all businesses, and with the small businesses, the really small businesses, bearing the brunt of the negative effects of corruption. So it creates a situation where illicit trade thrives, and then forcing legitimate businesses out of the market, leading to loss of potential revenue and employment opportunities. I think for me, this is one of the reasons why we really must must address corruption and unethical business behavior for us to be able to deal with the problem of corruption in the country. So we can't really address corruption without involving the private sector, and then seeing how the private sector, public sector, and other non-state actors like ourselves then just come together to be able to deal with the issues around corruption. I think, do you want me to continue, or can I stop there and maybe just come back again to be able to speak a little bit more about the subject at hand?
Yes, thanks, Sheila. Actually, you're right, because we'll also be bringing you back as the discussion unfolds. We'll also be seeing what else TI and how you're also supporting the private sector on matters anti-corruption. And at this point, let me bring in Mr. Philip Kagusha, and he works with the EACC. And what we know about corruption, we are told there is a demand and there's also supply side. So usually we say that the demand side is from public sector, and then the suppliers, the supply side team, are from the private sector. So when we follow the discussions from Sheila, she's talked about the convention, and maybe now we bring in the public sector to tell us more about the concept, that convention. What have we done also as a country in matters the convention? What does it mean to all of us? And at the same token, as I introduce you, that you are a litigator in civil suits for recovery of assets lost through corruption and forfeiture of unexplained wealth at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya. So you can even tell us more about what you've seen once you started recovering the assets that have been gotten through corruption. And as I highlight what also Sheila said, she talked of it kills businesses, and as government, you're supposed to provide a conducive business environment for all of us. So maybe let me just put you across, Philip. Tell us more about it, as we'll also be listening in from the other speakers and also bringing them in and having questions. I've seen some questions coming in. We will be talking about them shortly. So Philip, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. As you just said, I work at the EACC, and maybe before I go into the content substantively, I may want to share with participants generally what EACC does, because what we tend to find is maybe people don't understand exactly what the mandate of EACC is. So the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission is an independent constitutional commission established under Article 79 of the Constitution. If you look for Article 79, you'll find it in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And Chapter 6 deals with leadership and integrity. And these things are central to the theme that we are discussing today. The mandate of EACC is to combat and prevent corruption. And the way EACC does this is through law enforcement, education, training, public awareness, like what we're doing today with the other panelists. But EACC also does something else, which is the promotion of standards. And that's where you will see we sometimes intervene when we get our MCAs throwing chairs at each other. Sometimes we write to them and we give them warnings and we tell them that is unethical conduct. So that is a mandate of the EACC. Now, in terms of the AU Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, what is interesting, some of the key things, is that the convention, I think, has 44 member states out of the over 50 African countries. So 44 have signed and ratified. And one of the things the convention will tell you is that member states must undertake to have an anti-corruption agency. That is why you have something like EACC in Kenya. And I think a lot of African states are working very hard to establish similar institutions. I'm very proud to say that generally on the continent, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission is miles ahead of many anti-corruption agencies. Sometimes we are mocked when you hear that Zambia were here to do benchmarking, or the Democratic Republic of Congo are here to do benchmarking. And sometimes people are mischievous and they say, did they come to learn anti-corruption or did they come to learn corruption? The fact of the matter is EACC is a standard bearer for an institution fighting corruption within the continent. Some of the things that the convention is obligating member states to do is to focus on things like asset recovery, and that is what Martha just mentioned. So as you've heard, I'm a litigator. I do asset recovery cases. And this basically involves restoring property that is lost through corruption to the original owner. And in most cases, it is the state. The loss of public property through corruption, it goes way, way back. Those of you who are old enough will remember, we went through some period in the 90s where we converted government houses into private property. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversions did not follow due process. And you'd find government houses being taken away, school playgrounds being taken away, areas that had been set aside for markets, for hospitals, for dispensaries, and so on and so forth, being grabbed. And when EACC, at the time was the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, was beginning its journey, it relied heavily on the Ndungu report. There was a Ndungu report which talked about all the public land that had been grabbed. So if you look at the evolution of the work that EACC has done, 10 years ago, when I joined the commission, we were mostly following property like land, so you'd find forests have been grabbed, school playgrounds have been grabbed, and so on and so forth. So we spent a lot of time litigating those cases, and I'm happy to say we've made significant gains in asset recovery. What has evolved more recently is what Martha was referring to, and this is the forfeiture of unexplained assets. And this phenomenon is interesting because we have our public officers. We know how much they're earning because every 2 years they are completing the declaration of income, assets, and liabilities. But you find somebody living way beyond those means. So what EACC has done is that EACC has been at the forefront of taking cases to court, firstly investigating, establishing that this person has way more assets than they can legitimately earn, demanding an explanation, and where the explanation is unsatisfactory, we've been going to court and having those assets forfeited. Where I may see the African Union Convention taking Kenya forward is that the convention has provisions for criminalizing, illicit enrichment. In Kenya, we still do not have a law that criminalizes illicit enrichment, But the net effect is that in future, these people who have assets they cannot explain will be guilty simply of being in possession of those assets that they cannot explain. So this is maybe something that we can explore, and we cannot explore it by ourselves. I think we need support from the private sector, from civil society, because we can petition our legislators to pass these laws. So having touched on a few elements about the African Union Convention, I would like to summarize by saying one of the articles, I think article, I know Sheila has mentioned access to information. I think that is Article 9 of the convention. The interesting thing is that access to information is really about transparency. And, you know, transparency and accountability are two sides of the same coin. And what I find really, really interesting is that Transparency International's definition of corruption is the one that is generally accepted in the world, you know, the abuse of public office for private gain. But for those who are economists, we have an economic definition of corruption, and that is where you have a monopoly, you have a discretion without accountability, and that leads to corruption. So this Article 9, which talks about access to information, is really about transparency, and the transparency translates into accountability. So that is something that we're really excited about. And finally, as I wind up in my preliminary remarks, is the AUCPCC recognizes the role of civil society, and this is something that we should strengthen. I think I am right in saying that institutions like EACC, which are public sector institutions, have not always enjoyed a great relationship with civil society. So you would find the civil society organizations, they're entitled to criticize, and you know, the criticism in most instances is constructive. But at some point you would find like we are at loggerheads, and I'm very happy to say and to report to all our participants that we're beginning to see a change in the tide. We're beginning to see a trend where if we identify a common goal, at least it is possible for EACC on the side of public sector and people like Transparency International and other similar organizations on the side of civil society working together to try and solve the problem. So for instance, if we are going to work on a whistleblower bill, there is no reason why we should be operating at loggerheads, and I'm happy to report that it appears that we are beginning to find more things we agree upon than more things we are arguing about. So thank you for that opportunity.
Great, thank you, Philip. It is it's really interesting because, as you said, most people have a different discussion or appreciation of who EACC is, but we are happy that you're actually sharing this information with all of us to really appreciate what is expected. If the government and the country has decided this is the way we are going in matters corruption, then it is a responsibility for all of us to play. And if I'm just picking up the discussions from yourself, from Sheila, we've already heard from the two of you. So I want to bring in Mr. Patrick Obath, and he will give us the perspective from the private sector and also informing us who is CAPSA and what the role does the private sector play in terms of achieving the convention goals. So you can share with us just as this first round before we get into now the details of the second round of questions to everybody. Mr. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martha, and thank you very much for the disposition that have been done by the two earlier speakers. First of all, the private sector, CAPSA is an umbrella body that represents a large number of companies in the country. And the way CAPSA works is that primarily the membership of CAPSA is business associations, and CAPSA gathers together the issues that the private sector members have, primarily led by the association, because the associations also have their memberships, the individual organizations below them that are the ones that they have intimate contact with. CAPSA doesn't have intimate contact with individual companies, but the associations do. And through that network, we are able to sort of bring together common issues and be able to sort of take them up and create advocacy matters with government and any other institution that we feel would help the private sector to move forward. Conversely as well, if there is a need for the private sector to act together, then CAPSA is also an entry point into the private sector. and you can bring issues to KEPSA, and then it is taken across through the whole of the private sector. And sometimes you find that when KEPSA is trying to do advocacy, you find there are things that block the wishes of the private sector to move forward, and the business and the communities in which we represent to move forward. And one of the big items, obviously, for us is the issue of corruption. And whilst it is an important thing to business, if you look at the impact of corruption in the country, figures say that between 7 to 10% of the GDP of the country is lost to corruption. That's a large amount of money that is sitting out there, and that makes doing business in this country expensive, because if you just look at that, where does that money come from? It's money that is just being paid out that is not productive at all. It's just cash that is coming out. And as Martha said earlier, the private sector is literally the payer, as it were, in this particular matter. We are the ones who aid and abet corruption in some instances where the private sector wants to access services, want to access goods, and so forth and so on. But that being the case, the private sector, KEPSA decided to, through the KEPSA Foundation, to form what is called the Multi-Stakeholder Forum. And that's the current name, but it started off, in fact, as an anti-corruption forum within KEPSA, and eventually became a multi-stakeholder forum when its mandate grew a little bit more. But what the multi-stakeholder forum does for KEPSA is that it allows KEPSA to work with other public and private organizations in terms of creating common approaches to fighting corruption. And some of the people that we have in the multi-stakeholder forum includes the religious organizations. All of them sit with us in the multi-stakeholder forum. We have various NGO bodies. We have in the multi-stakeholder forum as well, we have some of the government agencies coming to advise us as well in the multi-stakeholder forum. And you'll find that also within that we are split into different sectors of society. We have the youth represented by the, exclusively as the youth. We have the women represented as a key component. So the multi-stakeholder forum is split into different ways of reaching out into the society that we have. And we've been able to do a lot of activities in terms of trying to craft ways and means of attacking corruption. The very first item that we did, and we spent a lot of time looking at this, was the anti-corruption conference that was held at Bomas of Kenya in 2019. And this took about a year and a half to plan. And the planning of this was not purely because we wanted to say, let's go and have a conference. We wanted to have some good foundation. And each of the sectors, as I talked about, were tasked to find out what type of corruption happens in their sectors. And they were each able to come up with different ways of corruption manifesting itself in the different sectors, among the youth, amongst the women, amongst private sector organizations, even within the religious organizations. That at the start, people thought that the religious organizations are not corrupt, but there's a lot of stuff in there that is actually quite corrupt. And then we put together all the issues that arose out of that, and out of that developed an agenda for the anti-corruption conference. And then we widened it a lot more, got government involved, and they had a multi-agency team that got together to also define how corruption happens in government. And the Anti-Corruption Commission was also involved. So a lot of organizations came together at that time. And the conference was primarily to lay bare where things were going wrong. And if you now try and look at that kind of activity and link it to the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, you look at some of the things that convention is trying to stop. And a lot of them, if you look at them, talk about a lot of things that are done either by the public or private sector. And I'll just go through a couple of them. Solicitation, acceptance directly or indirectly by any person of any money and goods in order to sort of in order to do something that is wrong. You go to items like illicit enrichment, use and concealment of proceeds derived from corruption. All those things, you find that there is a private organization somewhere that can do those things. And by having the multi-stakeholder forum looking at all these items means that we as a private sector will work towards crafting activities that will help our members and the people that we work with, our stakeholders, to try and put into place anti-corruption measures in their own organizations. And one of the other key things is working with organizations like the EACC, TI, and so forth, who have got the expertise, because the private sector are not experts in terms of looking at those areas. There are people who are experts that can help us to craft the kind of things that need to be done. And the multi-stakeholder forum that we have is the instrument or the vehicle that we use to actually to drive these activities forward. So what has happened in the last 2 years, 3 years since 2019 early, so it's about 2.5 years since then. A lot of commitments were made by different organizations and different sectors at that time. And there was the intention of having a follow-up a year later, and then a year later, and all of us know what happened. Just as we were planning that, in fact, COVID struck, so we couldn't actually do anything in terms of having the follow-up. But there have been conversations taking place with the different sectors in terms of how far they have reached in terms of meeting the commitments that they had made at the anti-corruption conference that was held in 2019. Some of the activities that you saw coming out of that included the fact that there was a lot of disconnect between the judiciary, and there was disconnects between the judiciary and the executive and parliament, all of them, and a lot of agencies, and even the EACC and the DPP and all these people. And there was, correct me if I'm wrong, Philip, there was a meeting of all the agencies together in Naivasha soon after that to try and align how they were working. That came out as a result of that anti-corruption conference. And a lot of organizations have been doing that and working together to try and remove the barriers that prevented the movement forward in terms of corruption activities. From the private sector point of view, the activities that have taken place from this is primarily to talk to organizations to get themselves committed as organizations to put into place anti-corruption activities. There were some that were existing already before that. From the Global Compact, there was an agreement by various organizations that had come together through that. And that has been going on for quite some time. However, we haven't really got traction, and let me just be honest on that one. We haven't got the kind of traction that we'd like to see in terms of the commitments of certain private sector organizations in terms of getting themselves committed to sort of weeding corruption out of the organizations. That notwithstanding, a lot of global organizations have got together and put together anti-corruption activities within their own procedures in the companies. And that includes a lot of the elements that we have in the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, AUCPCC. A lot of those elements are contained in the policies that organizations have. And I can tell you almost every organization has got great policies, they've got great procedures. The problem that we have as a private sector and what we really have to work on is how do we turn those policies into reality? A lot of times, the policies are ones that people put down and they have punishments if you don't do certain things. But you have to get caught for those things to happen. A lot of people become quite clever and they're able to sort of work through and work over those policies and still be able to do a lot of things. But the ideal is to actually have a proactive system in the organization that prevents people from getting corrupt. That is not an easy activity to do. And one of the key things, and I know I'll be handing over to Julius after this, is to get voluntary groupings that can actually get things to happen. And within the organization, your peer-to-peer you have peer-to-peer collaboration, and also holding each other accountable on a peer-to-peer basis. And therefore, those kind of things where organizations come together and work together to sort of hold each other accountable are key for the private sector to actually begin to actually have effective anti-corruption activities in the organization. And the other thing that as a multi-stakeholder forum will do together with the private sector is that corruption happens across our region. You find that companies are operating, and because of the different levels at which corruption is being tackled in the region, some companies move to other areas where corruption is less there's less focus on corruption. And I think part of our role as a private sector, KEPSA, the multi-stakeholder forum, is to work together with the regional stakeholders through the East African Business Council and through different organizations to make sure that we collectively put together instruments in each of the countries that we can all say we will live by those instruments as a private sector. And there are activities that are taking place in that area. We need to also promote common business practices that are anchored in integrity, but moderated by reality. I think a lot of times, if you go through, I think with a hard sell of anti-corruption in its pure sense, people will walk away from it because it appears to be too difficult. But if it's moderated by reality, whereby you actually go through steps and you take actually some hard steps, but you take them in steps where people see that is possible, that is possible, that is possible, then you find a lot more organizations are able to do this. And finally, before I stop, and I think there's a lot more that you're going to be able to say, the whole essence of capacity building for a lot of the smaller organizations that we have across the country. And those, I think, are the key ones that we need to work through, because corruption is going to be stopped, not by just the private sector doing what it does, but by the members, the people working within the private sector, each of them taking a responsibility to drive the message back into their own communities. And if we look at our supply chains as private sector organizations, you look at the, at our suppliers, our stakeholders, our employees, and the people that we work with, if we hold all of them accountable in terms of trying to make sure that we only deal with people who have got similar ideals and systems to us, then we can very quickly begin to actually spread the message of anti-corruption across the whole country. And if we're able to do that and take that seriously, within 4 to 5 years or thereabouts, we will see the juggernaut, or the if you like to call it, the very large ship, the super tanker in my world, the super tanker beginning to turn, because those are the kind of things where you can turn the steering wheel today, but the impact, the actual turn, begins a little bit of time beyond that. So the key thing for us is to really start action within our supply chains, within our stakeholders, so we hold them accountable to the same principles that we have as a private sector. As a private sector, we really have to get that going. And that is the role of the multi-stakeholder forum in this particular matter, in helping to actualize the agenda of the AUCPCC. Thank you very much, Martha.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick. And I've also noticed we have participants from Africa, from South Africa, beyond Kenya. And maybe one of the things that I realized they did not mention who Mr. Patrick Obath is, because everybody has heard your name or they know you, but it would be good for us to just mention who you are. And indeed, Patrick is our chairman. He is the chairman of the KEPSA Foundation. He's also an associate director at Adam Smith International Africa Limited. He's also a managing consultant for Eduardo Associates, a private practice consultancy. He is an engineer and he does work in the energy extractive industries and looks at leadership, governance, and sustainability. He's also worked in the different countries, and you can pull that from the discussion. He says that corruption doesn't only happen in Kenya, but it happens across the region. And he's participated, having been the MD and the country chair of Shell in Kenya and Tanzania. He's also been the past chairman of KEPSA. We have seen him work with the International Chamber of Commerce, the ICC Kenya Committee, and also is a member of the Global ICC Executive Board. He has been a chairman of different organizations, and I'll only highlight highlight like 3 of them, but there are very many. Is the Standard Chartered Bank of Kenya. We also have the Adrian Kenya. He's an executive director for TIMEA, that is the Trademark East Africa. He holds various professional degrees, and at the same time, he is a member of the directors, that is the UK Energy Institute, the Petroleum Institute, and having been in the petroleum industry, and he's a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, and has also been awarded the OGW and MBS. I think we'll be adding all those titles as we move along. So as we go through the next session and I'm looking at the questions coming in, there have been several discussions from the leaders, and we'll be bringing in Dr. Kimetich later when we're asking ourselves, what do we need? Because already we've seen the platforms that are available. From Philip's discussion, Patrick's discussion, Sheila, the common word is we need collaboration. We've talked about there's need for action, there's need corruption. What it does, it's all about governance. We've seen that the effect of corruption is that it reduces our competitiveness. Yes, we want to grow as a country in terms of matters economy. And then when we look at also the convention, there has been roles of the regional economic communities on the convention, whereby all of us, as you rightly put it, if it happens in Kenya and you have a business in Uganda, what does the law in Uganda say and what does the law in Tanzania say? So that these businesses are talking the same language across the region, and how do we work together? Because anyone who comes into the African continent, the first thing that hits their mind that Africans are corrupt. That's the first thing. So when someone is coming to do business, they always think, so what do I need to do business? How much, what percentage am I going to give out for me to do business? So let me still bring in Sheila. And Sheila, you can help us, just let us know. I remember you have a tool on the CPI that guides the East African community. And when we look at the regional discussion that we've already moved our discussions to, how does that tool work? And even as you do that, how the TI support the private sector to actually actualize it. So if you can just come on board, Sheila, and take us through that tool, it will be really nice to listen in. Yes, Sheila, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Martha, for another opportunity to continue to speak this very engaging discussion. So you've asked me a very specific question on how the tool, the Corruption Perception Index works. So maybe just a brief kind of explanation or description of what the CPI is. The Corruption Perception Index is a tool that Transparency International globally has used since 2001 to analyze and measure the perceptions of public sector corruption in different countries and territories. We call it, it's an index of indices. It's a composite index because it draws from 13 or more surveys, at the least 13 surveys of business people and expert assessments, and their perceptions of corruption. And the CPI really helps in revealing the levels of public sector corruption by ranking countries and territories according to their perceived levels of public sector corruption, and tries to also, kind of pinpoint weak governance areas that need improvement, and also allows for comparison of how other countries and regions are performing. So maybe just a snapshot, like for instance, in the 2020 CPI, which was the last that was performed, and we are waiting the one for 2021, which will be probably released next year in January. Kenya had a score of 31 out of 100, 31 on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 depicting, high level of corruption, and of course 100 showing a perception of, clean in terms of, less corruption. And so we there on that scale, we have a score of 31 rather, which is really below, because we are looking at the Africa Anti-Corruption Day. Maybe it's good to also highlight where Africa sits on average. Sub-Saharan Africa generally, on average, had a score of 32 out of 100. So we are currently below the Africa score, and the global score is, average score is 43. So in terms of how Kenya is performing, there was a little improvement between 2019 and 2020, but we still fall below the Africa average, Sub-Saharan Africa average to be specific, and the global average. I think therefore, maybe just as I try to talk a little bit more about the tool, is that there are 4 properties which make the CPI a valuable governance indicator, if I can say, because one, it has global geographic coverage, and then would say because it's an index of indices, it's then more reliable than each source taken separately, because it compensates for maybe eventual errors among other sources by taking the average of at least 3. A country will not be ranked if it has less than 3 different three sources, if it doesn't have up to 3 sources which have been able to rank it. And maybe some of the sources that we have used, for instance, include the World Bank, so some of the World Bank reports, Africa Development Bank reports, the Bertelsmann Foundation, the world. There's this study on the rule of law, and others that we also use. So they're very reputable sources of information that we use. So you'll not be ranked if you have less than 3 sources that have been able to cite or rank you. So by that, it means that because we're using more than 3 different sources, then that means that we are then able to cover for eventual errors among different sources by taking the average of at least 3. And then the other thing I would probably like to say is that there are specific dimensions of corruption that the CPI covers. So it doesn't cover all aspects of or manifestations of corruption. I think it's always important to say that, because one, I've said that it actually measures public sector corruption. So you'll find that we are basically looking at certain things. Maybe I think it would be easier for me to say what are the aspects that we don't look at, and that's why I would say that it is limited in scope, because while it captures perceptions of the extent of corruption in the public sector, it doesn't capture certain things like, for instance, money laundering, illicit financial flows, and so on. But it covers aspects around bribery, diversion of public funds, prevalence of public officials using public office for private gain without facing consequences, the ability of governments to contain corruption and enforce effectively integrity mechanisms in the public sector, aspects around red tape and excessive bureaucratic burden, which may then increase opportunities for corruption and so on. So I think it's important to clarify that. But other than that, it still remains a very important tool. But what I'd also like to add is that TI has also other tools that then both qualitative and quantitative research tools, both at the global level and also at the national level, which are also based on the actual experiences of citizens in terms of corruption. So for instance, in Kenya, we have what we call the bribery index, which we have conducted since 2001 as well, which then measures the experiences of citizens, including even business people, as they seek services from the government. So, the question we ask them is, in your interaction with the government agency, as you sought public services, where you asked for a bribe, and so on. And then globally, we also have the Global Corruption Barometer, which also captures actual experiences as citizens seek services from governments as well. So those also help to kind of shine a light in terms of the level of corruption and different aspects of corruption, like bribery. And maybe I'd also like to note that as one of our tools, we also have the Business Integrity Country Agenda. We conducted one in 2018 for Kenya, and where we're able to just analyze integrity within the private sector in Kenya. And the report generally analyzed, the laws in Kenya governing the private sector, issues around transparency in corporate reporting as well, in the companies listed in the stock exchange. That's another tool that we have also used. We call it the track tool. And so I think that there are also other tools that the private sector can also gain from in terms of trying to assess the levels of corruption in the country, particularly from also the perspective of the private sector. Maybe just a little bit about the Business Integrity Country Agenda, as I still have the mic, is that one of the things that we're able to particularly look at is, I said, we assessed key thematic areas, including integrity in integrity management, audit, transparency, disclosure, stakeholder engagement in the private sector, public sector, and also the civil society. And one of the key things that the report found was that private sector scored highly in regards to stakeholder engagement, including business-driven anti-corruption initiatives, and I was happy to hear Engineer Bath just highlight some of the initiatives that they've had from the multi-sectoral forum and so on. But so that was good in terms of stakeholder engagement, and it's something that we continue to encourage, because we know that, as even Philip has said, that corruption will not be fought by the EACC only. To need us all to come together to be able to join hands and tackle it, and really slay this dragon. But as much as we scored highly in stakeholder engagement, we also found that there was poor performance, particularly in regard to transparency and disclosure, especially disclosure of financial data on a country-by-country basis, and also performed poorly in terms of integrity management, particularly in regard to whistleblowing mechanisms. I'd spoken earlier about whistleblowing, so I'm not really going to into details on that. So one of the things that we had really recommended was, one, for instance, was the amendment of the Bribery Act of 2016 to include requirement for private companies to have whistleblower protection mechanisms, and the recommendation to have sample anti-corruption policies that then private companies can be able to adopt and now follow for their companies. So there are several tools other than the CPI. Of course, the CPI has a lot of global prominence, but we also like to highlight other tools that we conduct. Particularly, we always like to say that, yes, we have those tools that can be able to measure perception, but for us to be able to really highlight, the loopholes and see how we can be able to have a diagnostic analysis of how we can then be able to fill those gaps within, whether it's public sector organizations or private sector organizations. We need to have a more in-depth study to be able then to know, what really must we be able to do, what measures must we be able to undertake to be able to tackle corruption in a particular institution or sector. But for obviously, some of these tools like the CPI are a good, as a first step in terms of just being able to pinpoint the problems. But for us to be able to go a step further and be able to deal decisively with some of these loopholes or gaps within institutions or sectors, we then are able to undertake such studies that will be able to help us address these measures more decisively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And we can confirm there is on the chat box, please take note of the Business Integrity Country Agenda Kenya report. It has already been shared. At the same time, there's a link towards that. And then we also have, with regard to the Kenya Leadership and Integrity Forum from EACC, the link is also on the chat box. Let us keep on talking. And I'm also picking questions and I'll be directing them to the different speakers as time goes by before we have the Q&A session as such. So at this moment, I want to bring in Philip. And Philip, referencing to Sheila, she's talked about the Bribery Act. So you can also highlight and how it is helping the country and even EACC just collaborate more with the private sector. We also want to see, you can also tell us the tools available on matters to promote transparency. We look at accountability, ethical business, and also how do we encourage business investment opportunities in the country. So you can have that from purely the public sector perspective and how best we can continue and enhance this discussion and collaboration between public sector and private sector. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you, Martha, once again. So before I start, let me acknowledge the presence of, you said there's a participant who's checked in all the way from South Africa. I believe that is actually my classmate, Colette. Nice. We share a class at the International Anti-Corruption Academy. And this just goes to show how interested people are in the work that we're doing in this region, in the Horn of Africa region, East Africa region. And if I may just start, let me touch on the Corruption Perception Index. At the beginning, I said that there is no legal definition for corruption in Kenya. It's not contained in the convention. It's not contained in the Anti-Corruption Economic Crimes Act, because what we call corruption means different things to different people across the world. Instead, what we tend to have, we have a description of activities that constitute corrupt conduct. So that's what we've been using to enforce the law. But Transparency International have done great things, because if they've given us a generally acceptable definition of corruption, which is the abuse of public office for private gain, they've also given us a generally accepted index, notwithstanding the challenges. And I think Sheila will agree with me, it is virtually impossible to empirically measure corruption. So the next best thing is you measure perception. And the Corruption Perception Index, which has a list of 180 countries, is the best tool that we have so far. I don't know why Sheila said slight improvement. I think it's a great improvement, because in 2018, EACC was ranked 144th out of 180. The following year, in 2019, we rose from 144 to 137. And the most recent one in 2020 reflects that Kenya is ranked 124th. So that is a jump of 20 positions. So it's steady. But here's the interesting thing. Remember, this is a perception index. It is not measuring actual corruption. And I know Sheila called it an index of indices. And that is because the CPI relies on proxy indicators. So you have other experts in the field of economics, politics, business, and they will be giving their own assessment. I think one of the proxy indicators comes from the Economist. You're familiar with the Economist. The Economist has an intelligence unit, and they will analyze and they will tell you this is the status of corruption in Kenya. But one of the challenges I could say is that if you're looking at experts in business or in politics, I mean, unless they are all local, chances are they might miss out a little bit on the context. And that is where there's a huge difference between how Kenya would be ranked under the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index and a similar index which is run by the African Development Bank. Because in that one, out of 37 countries, I think Kenya comes in 5th. So right now, the CPI still remains the best tool that we have. And if it's the best tool that we have, despite its weaknesses, we have risen 20 positions in 2 years. So one of the comments I've seen in the group is, I think, from William Lay, who says he's been in Kenya 35 years and corruption seems to be getting worse. Excuse me. It may be more an issue of perception rather than actually getting worse. Because if the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, is to be relied upon, things are improving, and we must acknowledge that. The other thing I would like to mention is, contrary to popular belief, Kenya has a lot of freedom, especially press freedom, which allows our partners from the private sector, the media, to report corruption. In fact, some of the exposés have come from the media, and I believe the media is a member of the of KEPSA. So sometimes what happens, and this is the irony, that the more we are able to speak about corruption, the more the perception of corruption seems to be high. In fact, I recall one expert pointing out that the moment a country goes into overdrive with anti-corruption initiatives, the ranking initially goes down before it stabilizes and starts to go up. So if you're looking at every newspaper, I haven't seen the papers today, but chances are, aside from politics on the front page, the next big story is a corruption story. So what happens is you see corruption on such a, on a daily basis, to such an extent that it plants this perception, and it makes the perception solid in your mind that corruption is something that you cannot get rid of. But that is simply not true. We have seen examples of other countries which have come from a very bad position and turned things around. As Patrick Obath says, it's a big liner. You start turning the steering now, it may turn 5-10 years down the line. And how do we turn it? One of the things is the law. Martha, you mentioned a look at some of the laws that we have. For instance, the Bribery Act. The Bribery Act of Kenya, which was passed in 2016, borrowed heavily from the Bribery Act in the UK 2006. And one of the unique things it has introduced is private sector corruption. And in terms of EACC's mandate, EACC can go into private sector corruption when it is bribery. So let me be clear. If there is bribery in the private sector, EACC can come in. Other acts of corruption, for instance, conflict of interest or abuse of office, EACC may not be able to come into it. But where it's clearly bribery, that falls squarely within the mandate of EACC. Excuse me. Then the last point I'd like to make about the Bribery Act is that the amendments to the Bribery Act have enabled the EACC to discharge its mandate more effectively. Excuse me. And one of the ways in which we have been able to do that is when EACC is conducting an investigation into corruption, one of the things it needs to do is to freeze the assets before their loss. So let's say we are investigating someone and we believe they have acquired assets through corruption. One of the things we do is to freeze those assets. Now, the old law under the Anti-Corruption Economic Crimes Act used to place a standard on EACC, which was a bit high and not very clear. It used to say that EACC must demonstrate evidence of corrupt conduct. But now, with the amendments to the Bribery Act, all we need to do is demonstrate that we have reasonable suspicion of corruption. And of course, this makes EACC's work easier because at the investigation stage, all we need to do is to preserve these assets as the investigation is going on, so that at the end of the investigation, we make a recommendation whether we are going to charge somebody or we are going to recover those assets. And the final point I'd like to make about the Bribery Act is how the law now allows us to go into the bribery of foreign public officials. And the genesis of that goes all the way back to the United States in 1977, when they enacted the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And what the US government discovered, this was in the wake of the Watergate scandal. They discovered that US companies were maintaining slush funds to bribe public officials to get business. Now, what we are doing is we are trying to develop something similar, because if you're bribing a foreign public official, it should be an offense here. And now that falls within EACC's mandate. And the United States of America, I think, was a pioneer in that, because they did that in 1977. It was 20 years before the OECD followed suit in 1997. And then in 2003, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption introduced similar provisions. And now here in Kenya, domestically, we have domesticated that element of bribery of a foreign public official. So Obath and your members, the umbrella group under KEPSA, if you have your big companies trying to bribe say the Minister of Trade in Uganda, that will put you in trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we know, Patrick, no bribe in Uganda, otherwise we'll be caught. But anyway, we've agreed we are going to do the right thing, and I just want to bring in Mr. Patrick.
Martha?
Yes, sure.
Yes, sorry. Can I, before we lose that point that Philip has made, can I just clarify something he has said about the CPI?
Okay. Yes, just with, okay.
Yes.
Let me give you Patrick.
Yeah, just to clarify that you can't use a country's ranking or the number of a country to be able to measure progress, because it's talked about Kenya jumping almost 20 positions. But for us in the CPI, we emphasize on the score, the country or the territory score, because that's what really indicates the perceived level of public sector corruption. While a country's rank merely indicates its position relative to the other countries or territories that have been included in the index. So ranks can change. Merely say if we reduce the number of countries we have ranked, we have surveyed in a year, or some countries have not been ranked that particular year. That could really depict movement within the table, either upwards or downwards. So a rank is not really the objective way to measure progress. So we emphasize on score, and that's why I said slight improvement for Kenya, because in 2019, Kenya had a score of 28, and then in 2020, the score was 31. So that's just an improvement of three points. So not to try to downplay Kenya's progress, but also we can also match that with really what's happening on the ground and the level of corruption and how Kenyans are, their basically their actual experiences in regards to corruption. But we emphasize, just generally emphasize on the score and not on the rank. But also just to agree with him that why we emphasize so much on perception, because someone has inboxed, sent me a private message and asked why perception. Why can't we just, use the actual experiences? Because corruption generally comprises illegal activities, which are mostly covert and only come to light through scandals, investigations, or prosecutions. Like when EACC or other investigating authorities are able to get down and actually look into particular cases that have been reported. So many times a lot of acts of corruption don't come to light. And that's why it's very difficult to say, base our research on actual experiences. And that is why we rely a lot on perceptions, and I think we've made advancements as researchers in academia and civil society, and also government, in terms of objectively measuring corruption in specific sectors, even within that challenge that a lot of corruption doesn't come to light. Thank you.
Sheila, just before you go, and because I've seen a question here that relates to what you've talked about, that, and this is from Bile. He says, the informed perception by president is that we have 2 billion daily. So is that a useful index?
Actually, I think it's more. If you look at the Auditor General's reports, and even the estimates by none less than Treasury as well, on how much we are losing. They tell you that we lose 30% of our budget to corruption. If you can go backwards and calculate 2 billion times 365 vis-a-vis our entire budget or even expenditure, then even the president's calculation of 2 billion is actually underestimating what we may be losing to corruption. If you were to now just base our estimates on what the Auditor General has reported or what Treasury gives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. As we'll be picking more questions, it was now over to Mr. Patrick. So within the private sector, what tools are available and what are we doing? Because we heard that there was an improvement and private sector was recognized in matters stakeholder engagement, but at the same token, we had some poor ranking on matters transparency and disclosure. So maybe you can also tell us what private sector is doing and what is available, and then we'll pick questions and bring in Dr. Julius to tell us the tool that is a Blue Company. Thank you. Patrick, please. Please unmute.
Thank you. As a private sector, we tend to use the tools available, the OECD rules and so forth and so on, Global Compact, all those things. Individual companies subscribe to them. But the realization that we've come to is that, and this came up when you're trying to do the anti-corruption conference and talking to companies, is that corruption is designed by people in the know. And it is your own people in the company that design corruption in that organization. And it doesn't just sit in the private sector, it is anywhere. I know the systems in my company. I know who looks at them. I know how to conceal them. So when you come to talking about corruption, it is not the outside world that does it. It is the inside world, the people who are close to the system where you're working. So for a private sector organization to deal with corruption effectively, they have to deal with their own people. It's not dealing with third parties. And if companies can commit to understanding what it is that happens within their systems, then they can stop corruption by proactively stopping it in their own organization. And I'll give a couple of examples, and they're all generic, they're not specific to any company. One is from my own profession, engineers. An engineer can create a bill of quantities. Being the expert, they'll create a bill of quantities that allows their preferred bidder to actually win that contract on a very low basis, but be able to extract a lot of money because of the way the bill of quantities has been structured. And I then share that with the contractor. It will go through all the processes in the company. It will go through the procurement process, it will go through everything. And it will be a legitimate contract that has been signed off because our processes work. But the engineer, Patrick Obath, has designed within that, as the expert, a corrupt activity within that. The other one, and this one I say openly because we discussed with the medical profession. When you go in to a doctor's surgery, they ask you, are you insured or not? And this was told to us by the doctors when we discussed that issue with them. And the minute you're insured, the price goes up. but the doctor is doing exactly the same job. But what that has done, there's a quid pro quo, because insurances do not cover certain things. So when you've got that arrangement that the doctor's price has gone up, then you say, I've come for this, but it's not in the insurance scheme, they can now create a medical jargon that allows whatever they're doing to be covered under the scheme. So the two of you have, in a way, created a corrupt relationship. And when we discussed this with the doctor, they said that is how corruption happens amongst doctors, although they've taken the Hippocratic oath. So the whole essence, in terms of talking about private sector engagement, the thrust is going to be around getting organizations to understand that corruption is not about that guy in the government on the other side who you go to pay. It's the fact that your own organization has got the DNA that is the one that wants to go and pay, because your people, your organization, your ethos as an organization is the one that creates that need to pay, and pay speed money, pay whatever it is that goes on. So when you talk about the private sector, that is the thrust that we will be working on, is to change our way of working within the organizations. And once that happens and you begin to dry up the need for people to pay up or to be able to corrupt the system internally, then that will have a knock-on effect on other organizations. And one last thing I'd like to talk about is just that as a private sector, one of the things we will be trying to put together is a measure of a performance measure for corruption. And I think Julius will be talking a little bit about what they do, but really we need to have an index that shows how well you're doing in terms of your internal process of corruption. And this is an area that we would want to work with TI to develop those ones. I know they actually have a tool that they go into organizations to go and measure your susceptibility to corruption as an organization. And that would be a great thing to have as a public indicator for companies that wish to sort of participate in terms of susceptibility to corruption. But also, we would like to work with agencies to create a national susceptibility index that we can measure either counties, sectors, etc., so that you can begin to understand which areas we need to focus on. Thank you very much, Martha.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And you brought in that, yes, there is government to private sector, and there's also private sector to private sector corruption. And we all need to work on all these items. So as we've been looking at tools, I would like now to bring in Dr. Julius, because we've listened in from TIA, we've listened in from ESCC, we've also listened in from CAPSA. And to our participants, please note on the chat, we put the links to the various discussion reports and links also from CAPSA on matters, the conference that we've been talking about, that Engineer Patrick has spoken about. We've had the perception index, as also the report has been put there. So please engage on the chat. And we appreciate that there's also a youth with us, National Youth Leadership Forum. We appreciate it, and we've been told that they're also on the forefront on the fight against corruption. Yes, when we all participate, even the youth, and we know then future generations will be saying that there is a corruption-free country. So Dr. Julius Kipngetich, we're doing this in partnership with the Blue Company, and you sit on the board of you're the advisory board member of Blue Company. So we've heard about the Corruption Perception Index, we've been told what is there. ESCC has also told us about the Bribery Act and looking at the convention, the African Union Convention. And maybe I can just highlight that there was a question, how come there is the African Union Anti-Corruption Day? And yes, it was declared, I think it was 2003 in Maputo, that was Mozambique, and then it came into force within 2006, and I remember Philip really giving us what the convention is all about. So from these discussions, you've had Daktari. So please tell us more about Blue Company and how it will help the private sector lead the discussion of corruption, and even who else and what is required for someone to be certified as Blue. So over to you, Dr. Kipngetich.
Okay, thank you, Martha. And it's always a great pleasure for me as a Kenyan to come to forums like this, so that then we discuss what plagues Africa as Africans. And as I said earlier on, we have a challenge of good governance in Africa. The biggest drag, the thing that pulls us backwards has always been good governance. And the core of that good governance is corruption. If you look at the TI perception index, Africa is always classified red, okay? And with Asia. If you look at Europe and much of Americas, it's yellow. I mean, those are the colors TI uses. And red means more corrupt, yellow means less corrupt. And if you look at then the oasis of countries that are less corrupt in Africa, I will mention three, but one specifically. There's Mauritius, Rwanda, and Botswana. If you look at those, they are very progressive societies, and that progress is an indication of good governance and means less corruption. But I want to be specific about one, which is Botswana. You see, Botswana geographically is the same size as Kenya. And okay, that's a much lesser population. We have 50 million people, they have only 2 million. It's not the number of people per se, it is the way they have used their wealth very well as a country to benefit the 2 million. The per capita income in Botswana is now close to $9,000 per annum. In Kenya, it is 1,200. So the average Botswanan is 9 times richer than the average Kenyan. Why is that so? It's a country which is less endowed than us, because 80% of Botswana is Kalahari Desert. Now, the little that they have, and their main export is diamonds. Now, if those diamonds existed in Kenya, it would have created a war. But in Botswana, they laid a foundation of good governance so that the proceeds of the diamonds is shared in an equitable way with the population there. And because they have done it consistently over 60 years, then they have benefited the people. Now, look at Kenya. If we had done that in 1963, Kenya would be probably the premier African country and should have been the richest Black country in the world. Now, the thing that distorted all this is corruption. Corruption has distorted everything. It distorts resource allocation, okay? It has distorted effort. People don't work hard, you know, people want to be entrepreneurs because it is the easiest way. Why crack your head? So corruption has killed innovation in Kenya, creativity, and what makes us progressive has been killed by corruption, okay? And as a result then of all these things, we have one of the highest income distribution problems in the world. We are actually one of the most unequal societies in the world. I think there was a time we were in top 5. I'm not sure about the latest, because you have to look at the Gini coefficient. So why should we be like this? I know, Martha, you have talked about a youth being in this forum. What are we saying, those of us who are born at independence, to those who are born recently? What kind of country are we bequeathing them? Because if we can then continue like the way we have done in the last 60, then we are putting our own country in jeopardy. And all because a few of us are too greedy. And so therefore want to harvest where they have not sowed, want to distribute income they have stolen, okay, and say, I am popular. Those are the things that are killing then us and dragging us forward. So we have a section of the population working very hard that keeps Kenya going. Because remember, an economy works from an output. If there is no output, if I acquire an income without producing an output, that's corruption. And so therefore, I begin distorting. So if you see people distributing income where there is no output, that's a product of corruption. Because then how do you justify? You have not built the economy. You're just doing a transfer. So that is the core of Kenya's problem. And if we then sort it out, then we are progressing. Our approach to sorting this problem has always been what we call hard power, which is we now fix the law. We put the law, even including the constitution. There's a whole chapter on leadership and integrity. But has it solved the problem? 10 years down the road, the answer is no. We are not short of laws. We have the Bribery Act. We have the Anti-Corruption Act that creates the SEC. We have all these institutions, and I mean, we have strengthened criminal prosecutions. We have strengthened the police, DCI. We have strengthened the judiciary. The judiciary, since the new constitution came, I think their budget has gone up 4 times. So all these institutions are already in place, but why is corruption not reducing? It is a challenge of hard power. So Blue Company, therefore, is a new approach and say, yes, we will use hard power, the prosecution, the law, we'll jail somebody, hopefully we do, but that is not enough. So Blue Company is introducing something we're calling soft power, which is appealing to the moral conscience of the leaders and their institutions that they run. That is the whole core of it, which is if an organization goes into soul searching, relooks at itself and say, are we really doing the right thing? It is not what your auditors say. It is not what ESCC will tell you. It is not what the law is telling you. It is what is your heart, your own conscience telling you. And that is the real core of Blue Company. So Blue Company is a platform where an organization does some soul searching, reviews its own ways of doing things, and tells employees that it is not just, it goes beyond following the law. Because there are people who are crooked, but they will cover it under the law. But what is your conscience telling you about what you are trying to do? You want, when you sleep, they say that, the best pillow in life is a clear conscience. So Blue Company is appealing to that conscience and saying, are we doing the right thing as an organization? Me as a leader, am I doing the right thing? We are appealing to private sector to do the right thing because we are the supply side. The government is on the demand side. The president has been using a lot of hard power, in trying to, hold people into the court. And that's hard power, Government eventually will have to use soft power, because if people are inclined to do crooked things, hard power will not eventually solve everything. So we are beginning with private sector initially. We're saying, private sector, do your part. If we stop doing corrupt things by prescribing to the principles of Blue Company, then we are beginning to clean the moral conscience of our nation, beginning with ourselves at the company level. So Blue Company is the platform that KEPSA has adopted so that then we begin the healing process of our country and we stop doing corrupt things. What does it require? Only 3 things. Just 3 simple things. One is a commitment by the organization that they are going to the commitment by the leader and their staff. They meet together and say, okay, this thing is killing us as a country. Why can't we begin stopping? And you mean it from your heart. Because the minute you mean it from your heart, complying with the law will be automatic. So that is one. So there has to be a declaration by all members of that organization that this thing is a cancer and it's going to kill all of us. So let's begin stopping it. And if I've seen companies that if they stop doing corrupt things, they thrive. So many people think, oh, if I stop doing corrupt things, then I might not win a tender. Even the company, if they see value, even if it's a government institution, if they see value in what you give, it doesn't matter. They might be away for 1 or 2 years, they will come back to you. And I've seen it in my own company as Jubilee. You know, sometimes we lose some tenders, but we deliver the best medical insurance. So after 1 or 2 years, they come back and say, Enyewe, you deliver the best medical insurance, come back to us. There will be some pain by that declaration, but it is the sacrifice we must make for our country. It is a sacrifice that we make so that then we begin healing our country from doing things which we know are morally wrong. The second one is because the declaration has been made, the auditor, okay, your own auditor has to certify that all those commitments are in place. It is not an audit as such. It's just that we don't have any other ways of verifying unless your auditor says, my company has made the declaration and they are ready to live by the principles of Blue Company. So your auditor must certify, and they will do it every year. Then the third one is the issue of gifts. So 3 simple things, the issue of gifts. Now, corporate gifts and gifting is where corruption goes through. So we are saying as under the Blue Company project, there must be a policy on gifting. One, there must be a declaration of any gifts that employees are given. Because if employees are given a gift, now where is the boundary between a bribe and, so there must be that conscience to say, don't give me something. If I was supposed to provide a service, then that's my job, and I have provided the service. And yeah, so if, for example, let's look at a simple thing, okay? We go for an event, and then I give, say, the county commissioner a goat. You see, that goat must be declared as belonging to the state. Or the county commissioner says, you know, we have a policy that we don't accept gifts. Because the minute it goes internally that gifts are not accepted and employees believe in it, the healing process has begun. So you can see very simple things, but it begins with a declaration. Okay? It's like somebody going on stage and saying, I'm saved. You know, it's a declaration. It's a personal declaration. And they say, I accept Christ as my personal savior. If that is your mantra, do you actually believe in it? And if you believe in it, it triggers a behavioral change. So similarly, the Blue Company is structured to say, I am standing on stage and I actually believe I don't want to be corrupt and I want to live by the principles as enshrined in our laws. And so I make this voluntary, okay, commitment to be non-corrupt. It has to be inside your soul. And if you make that, the government need not come with hard power. It will have just automatically solved itself. So you'll always comply with the law, okay? You always build your brand around good governance and doing the right thing. And I am certain you will be as prosperous as is possible. So therefore, I just wanted to use this platform of Africa Anti-Corruption Day that we have started this initiative. We started in 2018, right here at Jubilee, and we are committed to making sure that we win as many souls as possible. So as EACC uses the hard power, from our end, we are using soft power. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Daktari. And for also the benefit of the participants, I need to introduce him that Dr. Julius is a scholar, is a speaker, as well as a corporate guru. He's currently the regional CEO of Jubilee Holdings Limited and also advisory board member of the Blue Company, and he's taken us through what Blue Company is all about and why as KEPSA we've also adopted the Blue Company project. He has served in various positions before, and what we can highlight, he has been the former CEO of the Uchumi Supermarkets. He has been the former CEO of the Kenya Wildlife Service, as well as the former CEO of the Investment Promotion Center. We also know him from Equity Group Holdings, where he served as the Chief Operating Officer. And he is a board member and also served in various boards, including the Kenya Tourism Board, the Kenya Deposit Insurance Corporation. And I think for now, I will leave it there as we all engage and get to know more about Dr. Julius. So looking at the discussions and everything, and we really appreciate that you've given us the background and why all this has translated to having the Blue Company project and why KEPS has adopted it. Indeed, what is coming out is that when we use both, as he said, we have both hard power and we have soft power, then we will support Philip the matters that he's trying to address from the public sector perspective and even the work of EACC. We will also support Sheila under Transparency International on how the perception can be improved and we can have tremendous improvement. We also work on what we had Mr. Patrick Obath talking about the private sector and even trying to, because we want to build the economy and want to do good business and ethical business, then all of us need to hold each other and talk about it. So at this point, I want to bring in questions, and because we've been told it is our duty and we need to do the right thing. There's some questions here and I'll be taking us through as we also try to manage the questions that have come in. Others have been mentioned and also discussed. So I will bring a question that we had, and this will go to Mr. Patrick because the question was about, and this is from Colette. We truly appreciate you. Yes, Philip, that's your friend from South Africa. She asked, what are the obstacles to public-private cooperation in your country? And there is some positive sentiment that they are inspired by the Kenya anti-corruption work. So well done to all of you that someone has appreciated the work being done. So Patrick, what do you think are the obstacles that are there for public-private cooperation? Thank you.
I think the obstacles are defining the shared value between the private sector and the public sector. A lot of times that shared value is distorted and corruption becomes the means of achieving that shared value. So it is almost like an illicit shared value that you have. I'd like to get things done. I want this to happen. I want so forth and so on. I want to make a bit of money. I want to do this. That shared value that comes in between is wrong and needs to be redefined. And if we can redefine it in terms of the long-term value that we as individuals will get, and within the sort of the limits of the state and the environment in which we are, then we can have much better cooperation. If we go and say we want to stop corruption in the procurement side, what shared value do we have in stopping that corruption in procurement? And we know the KEMSA situation that happened recently, where everybody just jumped in and did everything. There wasn't a shared value generated there. It was all around how can we make money out of this place? And that is a shared value that both sides had. And if we can change that narrative and say it's not about the shared value of me getting rich now, but if I am able to change the health system, get people more healthy, get the economy working because people are healthy, then I will get my value at a certain time, not today. But I think that today I must get my value out tomorrow, right now, is the narrative that must change. And if you find, as Dr. Julius said, you look at Botswana, right? When they started working with the bears in Botswana, the message that went out from the government to make that work was driven by the leadership in government saying, hang on guys, we are not going to share out that money now. We've got to, first of all, get it in, get it to start earning. And the earnings from that investment is what we're going to use to develop the country. And they agreed on what development was going to be done. But every single person in the country, in the leadership, had to sing that song so that everybody in the country understood that the value is going to come at a certain time. So we have to actually get all our politicians, all the people, the judiciary, the executive, the private sector, everybody, to start singing the one song. The value, the co-creation of value is important, but that value isn't going to be about me and you. It's going to happen when our country, the society, begins to get wealthy. And that wealth will happen with all of us together, not Patrick Obath today. I hope I've been able to answer the questions that are rather long-winded, but I think it's not an easy thing to do. It has a lot of discussion that must happen. And that is one of the things that we have to, as a private sector, continue to talk about. MSF, Julius in his in the Blue Company, all these organizations, we have to start having conversations that are hard about the fact that creating that value and defining it is easy, but implementing it is not today. It's 5 years, 10 years before you see it happening. Thank you.
Can I add something, Martha,
Yes,
on
please.
that?
Okay.
And I'll just give another example of another country in Africa and how, because of less corruption and less vested interests, they were able to advance something which has held some countries in East Africa for so long. And this is Ghana. Ghana, by TI, is less corrupt than East Africa. So when they discovered oil, okay, and they put in place all the necessary frameworks, it took them exactly 40 months to make the first shipment. And they have been exporting oil ever since, okay? How did that happen? It was resolute leadership and how he navigated vested interests of corruption out so that then it benefits the people. Look at Uganda. Uganda discovered oil in 2005. Up to today, 16 years later, they have not been able to move even a single barrel. Reason? Vested interests. Why are these vested interests? People want to gain unfair advantage rather than what is for the public good. Similarly, in Kenya, okay, we also have discovered oil, but look at the vested interests. I mean, some of you don't know the details, but I know. But just those vested interests is what then distorts public policy. Rather than saying, if we do all these things in a fair way, in an equitable way, without corruption, we are benefiting everybody. It's actually everybody who benefits. You know, if you look at, say, Rwanda has been able to clean up the country. It's clean. Kigali is a very clean, right from the airport. Why? It removed vested interests. Now, cleanness benefits who? It benefits even the crooks. It's everybody. So what when you design a non-corrupt system, we are actually designing something that benefits everybody, whether you call yourself public, whether you call yourself private or NGO, whatever it is, all of us benefit when a system is cleaned up and is equitable, and when there is sharing, everybody is happy. But the minute we divide ourselves and then some people want unfair advantage, you then generate a society that doesn't work. And when the society doesn't work, everybody is a loser. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Daktari, for that. I would wish to call upon Sheila and just request all the speakers to kindly retain your videos on now until we close, so that we'll be closing not too long. Sheila, this comes, I think I'll throw this to you. And we are told that the challenge is to maintain the moment. Just let me get it correctly. What is our role to the CSOs and grassroots in terms of holding institutions accountable? And they've been given proposals here in terms of constantly planning, budgeting, and monitoring. And since those are just ideas that have come about, I think the question now to you is, what measures should be put in place to ensure that corruption is done away with completely? I'll take it to you, Sheila, please.
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree with both Engineer Obath and Dr. Kipngetich, because when you look at reasons why businesses say, when you ask businesses, why do you engage in corruption? Well, they'll tell you, I did that to win a tender, to avoid regulations, to avoid competition from to avoid competition because of complex tax regimes, cumbersome and complicated regulatory procedures. But I think it all goes back that if we do the right thing, then there'll be enough for all of us. And it doesn't make sense for you to try and enrich yourself personally. But when you go outside, or in the bigger scheme of things, when we have issues around, access to water, access to clean energy, when you all have to suffer from power blackouts, everyone will be affected because of corruption. And when we don't have access to water, everyday water, like for instance in Nairobi, most of us are under some power rationing schemes. It's because of the corruption. So it doesn't matter how much you try to personally enrich yourself. At the end of it, you will all suffer. I'll use also the example of COVID-19. For many years, we've been unable to build our health system because money that is supposed to go to the health sector has been siphoned. And so we've not really developed our hospitals and other health facilities. And so now we are unable to manage the disease burden presented by COVID-19, among other diseases that we are still trying to manage. And it's not just that person who's been affected or infected by COVID-19 or by someone who has lost their life. It's all of us, particularly businesses. We are all suffering from, reduced business and income generation opportunities because of COVID-19. So we must look at it in the bigger scheme of things, I agree. In terms of what really must be done, and I agree with the calls around behavior change and the aspect around embracing values, because in the long term, for us to be able to fight corruption, we really must then invest in corruption prevention efforts to get to the root of the vice. I think we need to better understand the psychology of corruption and maybe together, and I'm happy that private sector is now in this conversation, see how we can craft a behavior change model that will help us promote a stronger value system and influence all Kenyans to make ethical decisions at an individual level. And this then will be translated to institutional level and then, of course, lead to societal change. In my submissions earlier, I think I'd said that, the private sector is regarded as the supply side of corruption. And as such, I believe that they really have the power to change the narrative through various measures that can be undertaken to really clean up the business environment within the country. And I think where legislation does not exist or is ineffective, because as Dr. Kimeticha said, we have a plethora of anti-corruption legislations. I think for me, the problem is in the implementation and the political will. But then we also have best practices, even regionally, as we then speak about, implementing the AU CPCC and trying to enhance regional cooperation in terms of fighting corruption. I think we need to look at what other regional standards or measures or tools we can use. And even just how do we engage with other business member organizations in the region, like for instance, EABC and others, which I know have developed codes of conduct, and how do we then enhance the fight against corruption internally? I think we, as the private sector, we need to see how they can strengthen the internal integrity mechanisms within their companies as they engage with third-party vendors, their suppliers, and also try and strengthen self-regulation mechanisms through operating and engaging with the BMOs and others. The implementation of code of ethics and so on. How do we institute sanctions and penalties to companies that breach these codes? I think that's another conversation we need to scale up. But more importantly, I think we would really like to see the private sector supporting us as civil society, being more at the front line in terms of fighting corruption. Currently, we've been pushing for certain legislation, as I mentioned earlier in my opening submissions, like on whistleblower protection, conflict of interest, which there's still a draft bill pending, the issue around lifestyle audits and so on. And then just greater implementation enforcement of existing laws like the Bribery Act, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act. I think especially the point, and let me close on the issue around public procurement, is really important for us to work together. How do we, for instance, develop and minimum standards and guidelines to enhance transparent and accountable procurement processes? And also just how do we work with the government to set up and implement communities of practice which are dedicated to transparent and accountable procurement processes, so that we ensure that we're also getting value for money as citizens as we get services from the government. And then there's also this the matter on open contracting. I think we need to push for the adoption of open contracting data standards, and particularly to help us facilitate and ensure that we get data disclosed in regards to procurement. I think we're still grappling with the issues around COVID-19 procurement. I don't want to go into that That's a whole story that we may not be able to conclude today. But that for us showed us lessons on what needs to be done, what needs to be cleaned up in terms of public procurement, and how we can then embrace open data contracting to ensure that Kenyans get information, and with this information, then they are then able to hold the government to account. But we need the private sector in this, because as I said, the government is not doing business alone, it's doing business with private sector organizations. So if they then take the first step in terms of cleaning up certain processes like public procurement, then we'll be going towards a more positive path in terms of fighting corruption in Kenya. The other thing that we also need their support is to push particularly for beneficial ownership transparency, which is key really in ending secrecy that enables corruption in this country. So for instance, publication of public registers in regard to who owns which companies in Kenya, who are the real owners of companies in this country. I think we need that kind of commitment coming from the private sector, so that we are able to deal decisively with corruption, because we must start with enforcing and strengthening prevention efforts. Thank you.
Sorry, I was putting on as a meeting. So now I come to Philip. And Philip, there is a question. I would want you to respond to two things as a request for more time from participants. And then is that from your perspective and being in EACC and even from the public sector, is that what do you think is the best strategy? How do we move this to ensure that we tackle rooted vice in our society? And there's also a question here that is directed to you. I know you had addressed it earlier. We had spoken, Sheila highlighted about the perceptions, but still the question now comes to the government side. That is it still a perception issue, even when the government admits to losing? Because that is the question from Charles Muya asking around it. So you can respond to that as the final question. I think we'll be going to Daktari, and then we'll have closing remarks and request for a few more minutes from our participants as we come to a close. Philip, over to you.
Thank you. So I will start with the issue of the strategy, and I think the presentation by Dr. Julius Kipngetich pretty much summed up what I would have wanted to say. And he captured it in this way. Firstly, we have to acknowledge that corruption is a problem for all of us. So why is it that the interventions we've had in place are not as effective? And one of the arguments is this. We have been treating corruption using a principal agent theory. Principal agent theory is where we say we are the principals, the citizens, and the people we put in public office are our agents. And so that all initiatives we've designed within that paradigm where we are the principals, we are the ones who instruct our agents. Now the challenge is that principal agent theory, it presupposes that the agent, whoever is your MP, your MCA, your senator, your governor, it presupposes that they are benevolent. And we know that we cannot leave it to them. Even if they went there and they were benevolent, they're still exposed to the risk of corruption. They're more susceptible because they're presiding over public resources. And the other weakness with the principal agent theory is that for us as the principals, are we always vigilant? And one of the best examples of how vigilant or not vigilant we are is look at the caliber of people we are electing into public office. We've been having this discussion about people who are facing criminal charges, but when they go to the ballot, we vote them in. What do you think will happen when they go in and they're presiding over public resources? They will loot those public resources again. So we need to shift from the traditional principal agent theory to what Dr. Julius referred to as soft power in academia, that is called the collective action approach. And the collective action approach includes public sector, private sector, and the people in between who are the civil society. As I wind up on the strategy, sometimes private sector does not realize how much potential it has in fighting corruption. I know Obath said they're not experts, that those of us in public sector are the ones who are experts on matters anti-corruption. But private sector are experts in other things. And for example, one of the things is research, because research will lead us to a solution. And if we're talking about maybe introducing technology, doing a procurement using technology, introducing things. I've seen something on the chat about blockchain. Imagine how far we would have gone if our registry, the land registry, was based on blockchain, which is an immutable ledger. It means it cannot be changed, it cannot be corrupted, but everybody has access to it. So nobody is going to sell you a piece of land, Martha, and they have forged documents, because there is a blockchain and it shows the original. So those are kind of interventions the private sector can bring to us. The things that they are very good at include resource mobilization, because for sure, always resources are always scarce, but somehow private sector are very good at making money. Some of that money can be set aside for developing solutions that fight corruption. And the last thing I'd like to say is that we can recast this issue of corruption from a moral, ethical standpoint, because that's very difficult. Nobody likes to be told that they are corrupt. I mean, if I woke up and said, Martha, this morning that you're lazy because you didn't report to work on time, it's not that you're lazy. Nobody wants to tell you that you're lazy, but we can recast the discussion about corruption from a moral, ethical standpoint to a systems standpoint. And that is why private sector will come in with all their research, with all their knowledge, with all their tech and all their resources to recast, to set up systems that will prevent and reduce the loopholes for corruption. The best example I can give is this, and I think Julius mentioned it. The US started making strides in 1977. They knew very well that their companies were going to lose out on business. But what happened 20 years later, everybody agreed that this was the right thing to do. And I think in Kenya, the private sector can start saying, for now, we're not going to engage in corruption. We are going to abstain. You may lose on business for a couple of years, but sooner or later, we'll start reaping the rewards. The last question from, I think, Charles Moya is about the 2 billion. This is what I would like to say. If you look at the statistics about how much is lost through corruption per year, and I think this is something anybody can Google, it is in excess of 600 billion shillings per year. That is lost through corruption, okay? If you work it backwards through the year, it's really just about 2 billion per day. Now, that is lost through corruption. It does not mean that there is somebody who has a wheelbarrow full of cash walking out of the ministry. It just means that's what we're losing, because we lose corruption through failing to plan for projects, through wastage, all sorts of things. So it is not really that somebody is cutting away in a gunia 2 billion shillings per day, but that is what we are losing per year. So if we lose 600 billion per year, if you calculate it backwards, it's approximately 2 billion per day. And I agree with Sheila that figure might actually be understated, because corruption is a crime of calculation. It's not a crime of passion like murder. So there's what they call the collusive nature of corruption. Two people with like minds come together and they commit corruption. By the time we're discovering it, it's way past. It's late in the day, and we may not uncover everything. So I think that is enough for now. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Looking at the amount you're speaking about, indeed, we need to just stop it, because that money can go somewhere else and we can develop the country. So Dr. Julius, there are also questions for you as we continue wrapping up. And this is, someone is asking, because we've said we want to be blue. And the question now to you is, what is Blue Company doing to ensure that with the level of corruption in Kenya, the youth and opportunities aren't compromised by the bureaucrats in this country? There are also questions that what are some of the soft powers used by Jubilee Insurance to curb corruption apart from moral conscience? Those questions would even help when we are moving blue. It can be an example to the others on what they need to do. There's also been a comment here. Yes, there's also a comment that not only that, also there's a bit of soft power used by ESCC in matters prevention, education, public awareness. That is from Lydia. We also have a question, there's also a comment that, yes, indeed, very correctly put, Dr. Kimetich, that indeed so soft, no pillow so soft as a clear conscience. So I'm trying to just get all the questions so that you can address them from your end. And then the person is saying, oh yeah, okay, this is the others that have already been tackled. So now over to you, Daktari. Please give us examples on what you've done and what else people can do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Martha. I think I just want to pick from where Philip, because he articulated very well on the issues surrounding corruption. You know, I want to just begin from where I left on the US. The US have an act of parliament, their own parliament, called Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prevents their own companies from bribing abroad. So it's not just that you can behave well internally and misbehave abroad. They want their companies to be clean wherever they are, okay? The impact of a company being clean is being professional. Now, if you look at investment promotion agencies all over the world, they are looking for American companies because they know those companies will do the right thing and execute professionally. The number one investor in China are American companies. Where do you think all these iPhones are made? They are made in China. So the Chinese are not saying, bring crooked companies to come and manufacture in our country. They are saying, bring the best. Okay, so it's a collective effort as a society to say we want to do the right thing. We want to attract clean companies who invest in our country to produce world-class products, and we create wealth for the people. That's the whole logic. So the minute you start doing crooked things, you attract crooked companies, you attract low quality things, and so therefore you begin to decay as a society. Even those who are corrupt in our society will still buy an iPhone. Why are they buying an iPhone? Because they know it is manufactured by the best. They are not going to buy a phone which is manufactured by a crooked company. So all these things are then related to our own behavior. So as we then talk about behavior change model, the behavior change model is creating platforms that appeal to the ethos, the habits, the rights, the rituals, the culture, then we are on the road to recovery and we banish this thing out of our midst. And I want you today, all these guys in this forum today, I want you to look at two countries that are a product of corruption. You know, they would have healed faster. Okay, one is a recent one, South Sudan. South Sudan celebrated 10 years last week, and it's a sad 10 years. The reason why South Sudan is in the state which it is in is because of corruption. God has done his bit. 80% of South Sudan is arable. They have a lot of water, including River Nile, that cuts through their country. They have incredible minerals, including oil. They have only 10 million people, but it's a broken society. You just need to travel to Juba, then you see the evidence of a broken society. Why? There's a small group of people who believe that they can eat to the exclusion of the others. They can be corrupt to the exclusion of the others. You see a lot of it, that evidence of that stolen money from South Sudan in Nairobi. The other country I want you to look at is a country that had a problem last week in the Caribbean called Haiti. Haiti is a sad case. It got independence just after the US. For more than 200 years, nobody is sure what the country is. And it began by its leaders stealing from the people. And over time, it has become an entrenched culture. And if you see, there are two countries on the same island, Dominican Republic and Haiti. If you fly over it, you can see the difference between the two countries just from the air. The other one is devastated, environmental decay. They have cut their forests. On the Dominican side, it is a well-run country and it looks to have its act together. How can two countries on the same island create totally different outcomes? The difference has been good governance. The Papadoc, the De Villiers are the ones who damaged that country, and because they wanted themselves to benefit, and then the rest of the country impoverished. Now, the unfortunate part is even when they have done all these things to their people, even nature itself hates them. They have suffered earthquakes, which are not on the Dominican side. The capital city, Port-au-Prince, has been devastated by earthquakes. And last week there was a murder. There was an assassination of the president. I want to warn Kenyans. It is very easy to be at South Sudan. It is very easy to be at Haiti. It is very easy. And you never recover. But even those who stole will begin to run away. It is very easy. So what am I prescribing? We can easily be a Mauritius. Those of you who have been to Mauritius, there's nothing special about that island other than good governance, just good governance. We can be a Botswana, okay, where we have 9 times the income with very little resources, only manage it well. We can be a Rwanda. If you go to Kigali, the city is clean, it is secure, and they encourage you to work out at night, okay, so that you test the security system, it works. When we are developing Vision 2030, our country that we admire, the country that we are admiring was Singapore, and it still is. Singapore, the per capita income is at $65,000 today. We started together at the same level in 1963. Why are we at 1,200 and Singapore at 65,000? It's because they created an environment which was clean enough for clean companies to invest and create wealth for the people. It is possible. As behavioral economists say, how much is enough? And they have put it that the minute income reaches $20,000 per person per annum, that is an optimal enough, and it creates harmony and peace in a society. For us, Kenya ought to have been at $20,000 by now. What has held us back? It is just corruption. If we just deal with corruption, Kenya's economic growth rate will be faster, we'll attract investment, we will deal with these unemployment problems, we'll deal with this inequality in our country. We just need good governance. And the creativity that will be unleashed will even surprise ourselves. So my plea to everybody in this forum is, let us go blue, let us shame ourselves, let us search our conscience and say, we can't continue like this. And if we continue like this, we are courting a South Sudan or a Haiti. And if we change our ways, we can be a Botswana, we can be a Singapore, and lately I've started also studying Ghana, that we can also be a Ghana. Things moving in the right direction for the benefit of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you've also addressed now what the National Youth Leadership Forum by Robert, he said that indeed corruption has led to youth unemployment. It has led to youth engaging in unlawful acts. We've seen the misuse of resources, diversion of resources to useless projects. We've also seen bureaucrats are more concerned of their own interest at the expense of the youth welfare. There were also discussions from Mr. Bill Lay, who also said we need to expand and bring in more private sector players. And indeed we will, because this is a journey. We are all in this strain of going blue, and we want the entire private sector to go blue with us. The blockchain has already been discussed by Philip. We've also seen discussions on what is required to be blue. You've mentioned how Jubilee is handling it at your place. Then, well, don't move. It's all about good governance. So I think all this, there's also a youth here. Just let me read this one from Unene, that she's from Orak Branding, a youth in business who's also passionate about good governance. She is inspired. And how can a startup like ours be a blue company? We have shared the link on the chat, so anyone can go there and also look at it. Also, as KEPSA, we are asking all our members to please go blue, because that is the tool and the initiative that we are all saying. We want to be blue, and we are going to regulate ourselves as the private sector, so that next time when TI led by Sheila is going out to say that how the Kenya's ranking is, then as the supply side, we will have our own tool to say, this is what we are doing as private sector. That when you see I am blue, then please know that I am not tolerating corruption. We also have the ESCC who will be there and checking on us, because yes, it is the duty for both sides, demand side and supply side, to look at everything together and say, as a country, we are leading the government on the same. We have a multi-sectoral forum, and also Mr. Patrick has talked about it, that it brings everyone to the table. So any plan that you want us to do together, we will be doing that together, because everything is for the country and for the future generations. And when we look at those countries, and I was just smiling in my head and thinking, wow, the day we will say we are at 20,000, it's just interesting, dollars per capita. That is really the place where we all want to be. And the sad reality would be the reverse, that our children and children will be coming in and seeing either a South Sudan or a Singapore. So we have a choice as Kenyans to choose where do we want the future generations to be. Do we want them to get a bad country, or do we want them to see a happy and a positive country, and what do they really like? And then we also have from Humphrey saying that good job, we need to reprogram the Kenyan mindset to uproot corruption. So it is indeed all of us have a responsibility, and as the private sector, we are saying we are going blue. We have extended our time, but I want to close and bring everyone just to give their closing remarks and tell you we are going blue. Please like the pages, subscribe the pages. We have at CAPSA Kenya, we have the TI Kenya, we have ESCC Kenya, we have the Blue Company too, and we have, which is also part of Jubilee Insurance. Please, let's continue with the discussion and be the change that we want to see. I want to start, as usual, with government to tell us the closing remarks, and that is Philip. Please tell us your closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of closing, I think what we will be benefiting from after this discussion, because this is just the first step in a long journey, we will have private sector coming in, because first is acknowledgement that this problem affects all of us. But one of the things that we will see this kind of engagement doing is to promote a civil culture, a civic culture, basically getting people to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. And I love the fact that we have a private sector alliance here, because we can leverage on this, we can leverage on our social capital, and then we can start having widespread habits of doing the right thing. So this is what I'm happy about, and I'm really encouraged by this, and I'm imploring private sector. Mnajua nyinyi ndio mko upande ya supply, so we start fixing on that side. The government will work on its side, and together we'll improve this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Philip is the ESCC advocate and is also the Assistant Director and Head of Communications. We truly appreciate, and we will continue working together. Asante sana, Philip. I'd now like also to bring in Sheila to give us her closing remarks. Sheila, please.
Thank you, Martha, and my co-panelists and all the participants for a very, very engaging session. I think we are all awake now from the late nights, the late night we had watching football. I will end how I started, because I started by saying that I started by drawing the nexus between the sorry state of the economy, because Dr. Kipngetich has also touched on that, and particularly raising and talking about the debt levels that have been rising in this country from 2013 at 1.8 trillion to 7.3 trillion as by January this year, and I think continuing to rise, leading to very high public debt repayments, which are squeezing out other public expenditure priorities. And now, as we speak, we are forced to borrow to meet our recurrent needs, with debt repayments almost outstripping our revenue collections, which means that we are broke, and many Kenyans are socioeconomically vulnerable. In fact, as I was listening to Dr. Kipngetich, we are swinging towards those countries that he has adversely mentioned as sitting on the bottom rungs when you assess various socioeconomic indicators. And there's a big role that private sector can play in determining whether we head towards the right direction or spiral further downwards. And if businesses choose to remain on their sidelines and continue to participate in corruption, then they will not be able to gain access to foreign and domestic investments. And moreover, corruption will leave businesses, not just businesses, but all of us finding it very difficult to survive in a highly demanding global economy. So we just must do the right thing. And I think as we continue to reflect on how well we have been able to achieve the commitments we have made in the AU-CPCC. I think it's important for us, both as private sector, to go back to look at the things that will make us achieve some of these commitments that have been made by government in the fight against corruption, particularly in regard to public procurement and so on, as highlighted in Article 11. But I'm also making a commitment, because Article 12 also speaks about civil society and the media, but also calls for the government to put in place measures to involve civil society in the fight against corruption and ensure that the media is also given access to information, because we then are not able to monitor good governance and fight corruption if we don't have access to information. So we continue to fight for those things, but it is important that for all of us to continue to come together, to continue to monitor the implementation of the AU-CPCC, and where legislative and other measures that have not been undertaken, I have highlighted all these that have not been undertaken, where they continue to be missing in that bigger picture in regards to our governance landscape, then we need to continue to push for that so that we are making progress in the fight against corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Indeed, we all need to play our role in this, and we will continue working together. So we appreciate, and let's continue the discussion. Sheila Masinde is the Executive Director at Transparency International. I'll bring in Mr. Patrick to also say his closing remarks from the private sector and also the co-host of this meeting. Mr. Patrick.
Thank you. I'll literally spend a minute, and I'll do this. Just put my hand in the screen and say we tend to focus on that finger. And yet, these three are pointing back at us. If we don't take note that the three are more important than the one, we will never be able to close corruption. And therefore, it means that individually, in our own organizations, as individuals ourselves, we need to be the ones that are creating that change. It will not happen because Philip is doing what he's doing. And I look forward to the day Philip and his team will be coming to audit how well my systems are working, not coming to audit to find out where corruption is happening. Because ideally, the role of the Anti-Corruption Commission should actually be around talking about the good things that are happening, not going to try and find out the bad things that are going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick Obath. He is the chairman of the KEPSA Foundation and also leading the discussions from the multi-sectoral forum, where good governance is discussed and also anti-corruption is discussed. And as we've had, let us look inwards. Let it start with me. And I also want now to bring in Daktari to give his closing remarks as also our co-host for this meeting. Daktari.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And mine is just say thank you. And we look forward to greater conversation on this area. We are not going to change behavior overnight. It is a consistent process of saying, let us start somewhere. Let us be persistent to make sure that we change the behavior. It's going to snowball. It starts with me, as Patrick said, and then you influence your neighborhood, you influence your community, you influence your company. And by doing this, over time, we will clean our country. We clean our continent, so that then Africa will cease from Sheila Masinde's corruption perception index from being red to yellow. And we have countries in Africa which are making tremendous progress. I gave you 3 of them: Botswana, Mauritius, and Rwanda. I've seen also Ghana is beginning to become yellow. So it is possible. And you see when those countries become yellow, which is less corruption, you will see progress among the society. Things start moving, happiness all around. The reason why you don't enjoy Nairobi at night is because we fear our own citizens, because they have nothing to eat. The reason why you fear going beyond Moi Avenue, east of Moi Avenue, to Ronald Ngala or Resco's Road, is because you fear being robbed. Why? Those robberies is an indication that we have an income distribution problem. And so I would like to urge the private sector, if we want a country that works for all of us, let us begin by looking inward by making sure that we eliminate corruption. And if we significantly make a dent in corruption in years to come, this country will really prosper and it will be good for all of us. God has given us one of the best countries in the world. It is just us who are spoiling it through corrupt practices. So let us go blue and let us change Kenya and change Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Julius. He is the Blue Advisory member. He's a board member in the Blue Company Project and also the regional CEO of Jubilee Group Holdings. There's one statement from Anne. She says, thank you for the very informative webinar and very intellectual exchange. It is said that knowledge is power, and therefore, how can we strengthen the public education awareness and training on anti-corruption and good governance? And our commitment also, as has been highlighted, we will continue the discussions, look out for the trainings, look out for more webinars around it. We are sharing the Blue Company requirements. Please join, let us all become blue. And there was even a comment here by Mr. William Lay who said, can we have the president come and launch this initiative? And yes, we will go to that extent that we want the world to know that the private sector is leading the discussion of going and becoming corruption free, and we're leading the way as KEPSA and together with Blue Company, the initiative that has been there. So it has been, thank you, Madisa. It has been an engaging discussion. So we truly say thank you, and the corruption discussion can never be enough. How many hours? We just need to continue. It's a continuous discussion. And every day I remind myself that Professor Madai said, it is in the little things that we do that makes a difference. So as we leave this conference today, we need to go back and ask ourselves, what difference am I going to do to ensure that Kenya becomes on the chart of being a corruption-free country, and also someone else in another country can be quoting us, and we're happy we have Colette from South Africa already appreciating the initiatives, and we know that together soon we will be in the level of Botswana, Ghana, Rwanda, the Singapores, and not be in the other category of what corruption has done to the others. So we really say asante sana, and one who wants to be a member, yes, KEPSA, you can join KEPSA. There is information on our website, but then you can write to us, info@kepsa.or.ke. We'll share with you the membership details and you will join us. We'll also circulate on how to become a blue member. When we are many, when we start a movement of being blue, then we can invite the president and even other international leaders to show them that Kenya private sector is leading the way of making Africa corruption free. It has been a good discussion. I have been the moderator. I have enjoyed all this and I've learned a lot. My name is Martha Cheruto. I am the Deputy CEO at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. It has been a pleasure enjoying and just be moving and moderating the discussion and listening in from the experts. So asante, thank you, Patrick, thank you, Sheila, thank you, Dr. Julius, thank you, Philip. May God bless you all, and thank you, our participants. We've sustained our participation all through the way. And to our organizers from both organizations, Anne Katule, as well as Evelyn Kabetu, we say thank you for doing and organizing this forum. May you have a corruption-free week and years ahead. Let's all go blue. Goodbye.
Thank you, Martha. Thank
Bye.
you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.